My name's Kenny McGee, CEO of Component Sense. Component Sense was built initially to take a common sense approach to electronic excess and obsolete, and that is still what we primarily focus on. We have very strict sustainability targets, and we're very focused on leading electronic manufacturers towards zero waste. As CEO of Component Sense, our primary focus is on redistributing brand new components from one large company to another. Our interest in recycling at this side is just because we know it's not been done properly. So I first found out about Agbogbloshie back in about 2007. I saw a documentary on the BBC, and they were just showing at that stage what was happening to our e-waste. So in the UK, we were under the impression our e-waste was being recycled. If I took something to the local amenity site, I expected it to be recycled and managed properly. What that documentary highlighted was that actually often our e-waste ended up in places like this. So Agbogbloshie was highlighted. It was one of the areas that was talked about. So that was a long time ago now. My first day here, I think I was just a bit overwhelmed. You know, as soon as we got out the taxi, we went to the old Fadama clinic, and the smell from the burning was powerful. It was powerful. My eyes were stinging literally in minutes. My breathing, I had to slow my breathing. We saw some guys burning cable. It's a common occurrence here. So the smell at that point was probably the first thing that struck me. We then came to the scrapyard over here, and that's where we saw all the dismantling. So, you know, people over there are dismantling things, everything from cars to fridges, freezers, air conditioning units, PCs, laptops, telephones, mobiles. Yeah, I mean, there's actually a thriving economy here. Whilst it looks a bit unusual to us, it's a very high functioning economy, and there's a huge complex supply chain going on in here. The volume of work and the organisation of it is quite incredible. I mean, it's all very informal, but there's a process. So behind me you can see there's some stone buildings, concrete block buildings. Most of the buildings are just timber and built from waste material, things that they've found lying around. So once you get beyond this sort of first row of buildings, you can see there's a few concrete buildings. Then almost everything thereafter is timber. The homes are pretty tiny, 2 metres square, some 3 by 2, but they're pretty small, they're pretty basic, and often have many families sharing a house. Rent here is about, on a 2 by 2 house, about £13, $15, $16 a month. Which for these guys and the income that they have, that's a lot of money. So they tend to share houses. We've heard stories of 15 people sharing a house, and they have to sleep in shifts because these are not big houses. In the front row here, all across the front, is where the recycling happens. So, these guys used to be on this side of the river. This area was bulldozed, and they were basically moved, so they had to move to that side of the river. So the recycling now is right beside their houses, whereas it used to have this little bit of a gap. It's like a production line. It's literally like a production line. People bring product in, they take the bits that they want, they pass it on, they take the bits they want, they pass it on. So there's guys in there that specialise in aluminium, there's guys that specialise in copper, there's plastics guys, there's steel guys. And there might be 20 or 30 people collecting steel, and it's one day a big truck will come in and they'll just all load it up, and there's weigh scales everywhere, so everybody knows what their stuff's worth, they know how much weight they've got, and it's really is fantastically well organised. So one of the other things I've learned is how important the second-hand sector here is. People can't afford new products. There's a flood of cheap Chinese products coming into the market, but people want better quality stuff. They want stuff that's going to last, and the big brands that we rely on in the Western world are very much in demand. So the second-hand market is how most people get their products. Now, the goods that are coming in here, if they're working, they will find their way into a new home. If they're not working, the repairers will give it a really good shot at keeping them going. And then only if they're absolutely irreparable do they end up here. So it flows through the chain. The goods coming into the port, to the La Paz area seems to be a big area for second-hand goods. We've literally been up at the second-hand goods stores and repair sites, so we're seeing people trying first of all to repair televisions, phones, fridges, everything you can imagine. So they're putting a lot of time and effort into trying to repair them first of all, so that's the first step. We spent some time with a guy who was soldering these tiny little things. I mean, I started out as an engineer working in PCB assembly as a 16-year-old boy, and components in those days were big chunky things. They were fairly easy to solder. This guy was working away with very limited tools, a pair of tweezers and a very basic soldering iron, and he was able to do really quite intricate stuff, so I was quite impressed. The school that he went to is YouTube. So everything he's learning from YouTube, so he's doing a great job. If it's completely irreparable, they then salvage circuit boards from that device for spares, because some of those parts would be useful for repairing other electronic items. So that's the first stage, and then once it moves here, it really is now for dismantling and scrap. So by the time it comes down here, they're dismantling it. Circuit boards are typically removed already. There is some here, and there is people collecting them here, but mostly it's housings, it's plastics and all that sort of stuff. So you can tell that the focus has been on e-waste, and it's been very focused on the stuff that everybody recognises as e-waste, which is the circuit boards. But the housings, the metal housings, the plastic housings, the cable, the wire, all that stuff is part of our e-waste. So the e-waste problem is far from solved here. And behind me you can see the Bola, which is basically a landfill. It's a massive mountain of waste. So there's everything you can imagine in there. There's still waste collectors that are working up there, collecting and looking for, again, the valuable items such as plastic bottles, anything that really has a recoverable value. The burning, or a lot of the burning, happens just beyond it. So we've spent a lot of time in that area because it is one of the biggest concerns that I have personally is the damage that these guys are enduring being in that area, but not just them. The smoke often is blowing right across the houses and into the housing area. It is rough. It's hard to be there. We were chatting for a few hours yesterday, maybe 3, in a little kind of makeshift tent, I suppose, and my eyes were really stinging by the end of it. And these guys are living with that day in, day out, every day of the year. So beyond the Bola, the mountain of waste, is first of all the burning site, and then beyond that the river turns round to the left and eventually gets to a dam. And the other river, you can't see any water at all. It is literally full of waste. This one, we had a fairly heavy rainfall last week that has washed a lot of this waste down the river. This was much fuller of waste when we arrived here, but the other river is completely blocked. And from what I can gather, it's deep in waste. It's not just a thin layer of waste, it is deep in waste. So, yeah, there's a lot to sort out. The dam looks like it was designed, from my engineering point of view, it looks like it was designed to actually draw waste out of the river and into a recycling plant, but next to it. We've asked some of the people around about how long it's been broken for, and it's certainly been broken since the millennium. So 24 years-ish at least that it's not been working. So the rubbish just collects at the dam and it just backs up until you get heavy rain. And as I say, we had some rain last week. As soon as the rain came, we knew the dam was going to burst, and of course it did. And then all of that waste that had built up was now down on the beachfront. So we spent some time with the guys down there in Jamestown, the fishermen and their families. And that particular day, we rushed down to see what the effect was, and it was incredible. I mean, you couldn't see any sand for waste and rubbish that had washed up. The water was black, and it wasn't the week before. You know, the week before it wasn't clean by any stretch of the imagination, but it looked like sea. It looked like the water you would expect to see at the beach, and it certainly didn't that day. It was literally black, and you could see maybe a mile or so out there was a blue line. So you know, there was a good pile of waste had gone down into the sea that particular day. I've got to be honest, I imagine it to be a lot smaller. The sheer scale of it is incredible. You know, as you walk through the streets, you get a real sense of how they live. You know, we've actually flown a drone a few days ago to try and give a sense of the scale. The local chiefs here think there's 30 to 40,000 people on site. The local church, who's done a census of some sort, believes it's closer to 140,000 people. So it's an enormous economy. The other things we've learned is really the needs of the individuals on site here. You know, people need some really basic stuff. You know, there's pretty poor sanitation. You know, it appears that the sewage, the waste, is just flowing into this river. So this river is not clean in any shape or form. Somebody fell into the river yesterday, and everybody panicked. But you know, there's also a bit of a fear of the river. There's a lot of people have lost their lives here. So you know, some simple safety measures. You know, health and safety doesn't exist here. People are in sandals with hammers and chisels breaking up our old devices. It's pretty dangerous work. Pretty dangerous work. So yeah, we've got that. We've got access to healthcare. You know, there is some healthcare nearby. A lot of people don't seem to know about it. So there's definitely a lack of communication that could be improved dramatically. Yeah, my experience here has been quite eye-opening. The things that really helped me through the week was the little messages of hope. You know, there's areas and things that are happening here that are positive. There's definitely been some changes over the years. It's very slow, and for somebody that's a business person, an entrepreneur, you know, I don't really do slow, but it's so complicated. This is not a short-term project. This is not something you can solve in a year, 2 years. This is something that needs a long-term concerted effort, and there's lots of people's livelihoods at stake, so it has to be done gently. People here are telling us that, you know, people come and nothing happens. But the process is long, you know, and people here are used to transacting moment by moment. You know, if somebody burns some wire for someone, they get paid immediately. If you want a hot shower, you have to pay for it immediately. If you want to go to the toilet, you have to pay for it. So there's all sorts of things going on in here, and it's quite incredible. Initially, I thought it was all kind of community-based, but apparently everything costs. So that there is an immediacy in people's expectations. You know, people we've talked to are literally saying, "So what are you going to do?" And they expect us to do something now, and that's challenging. There's all kinds of good ideas around as well. You know, when you speak to people, you know, and ask them what they would do differently, what would they like to make better. There's loads of ideas in here. There's loads of things that could be done better. You know, there's talk of training courses, education. You know, there's little bits of schooling happening, but when your first priority is eating, sometimes those things are compromised. I am still formulating and processing everything that I've seen and heard. And somebody said to me before I came out here that you'll come back a different man, and I think that's quite possible.